Gross national happiness is a trap. The border gate slides shut with a metallic sigh. A foreign TV crew stands blinking in the dust, while an officer, calm and polite, says two words: cultural security. Behind the bars, prayer flags snap in alpine wind. Beyond them, a country that counts happiness instead of income and charges travelers by the day sits quiet, almost theatrical. Hotels built for wealthy guests sit half empty. Young people daydream about Australia. And one detail matters more than it seems. Until 1999, television and the internet were illegal. To understand how a nation tried to stall the century using mountains and philosophy, we go back, up. The wall of mountains, geography as policy. From the Indian plains, the Himalayas rise like a verdict. Bhutan is folded into their ribs, landlocked, high and difficult by design. The country isn't a single shelf. It's a set of stacked river valleys carved by the Wang, the Puna, the Trongsa, the Drangmi. Villages cling to slopes where terraces hang like steps for giants. Getting anywhere means learning the rhythm of switchbacks and landslides. In winter, passes close as if a hand turned the key. Geography doesn't ask permission. It sets the meeting times and cancels them when it wants. Those river valleys do more than water fields. They dictate where people settle, what they plant, and how news travels. For centuries, traders threaded yak trains through narrow saddles, swapping wool and salt for rice and metal tools. The routes were few. The choke points were clear. Whoever controlled a pass controlled conversation. When you grow up counting hours in hairpins and seasons by whether a ridge is passable, isolation stops feeling like a policy. It becomes the weather. Roads arrived late and cautiously. Even today, a single highway can become a long argument with the mountain. One airport, Paro, sits in a bowl of peaks so tight that pilots train specially to make the final turn, wing close to cliffs. Clouds can cancel the state. A storm over Dotula and tracks back up for miles. The modern world loves speed. Bhutan's hills do not. This natural slowness became a political asset. If you can't be everywhere, you can choose where to be. Gates don't have to slam, they can be narrowed. Historically, Bhutan funneled entry through a handful of points: Phuentsholing on the Indian border, Samdrup Jongkar in the east, a few smaller crossings whose rhythms beat to trade and trust. At higher altitudes, paths thin to ledges. A guard post and a kettle of tea become the entire frontier. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the map's margins. Two giants pressed against the parchment. To the south, India's plains feed roads, electricity and goods into Bhutan's lower valleys. To the north, Tibet's plateau rises beyond taller mountain walls. The Himalayas aren't just scenery, they're a buffer. Treacherous passes limit armies the way they limit tourists. That gave Bhutan options, enough time to look at the 20th century sweeping through Asia and say, let's try a different pace. But there was one problem. Geography preserves what it traps. It keeps dialects alive, monasteries busy, forests tall, and it keeps economies small. If you need a road to sell apples and your road takes 5 hours to cover 50 kilometers, you price patience into everything you do. The result is a country that learned to value what doesn't move. Land, water, ritual, kin. Those become policy almost by default because they're reliable when trucks are. To understand why that matters, listen to the sound of a morning in a western valley. Roosters cut the cold. A conch shell calls monks to prayer inside a dizong that sits like a stone ship above a river. Across the span, children in Go and Kira walk to class, their footsteps crisp on frost. Above them, spruce and pine shoulder the slope, a green lung exhaling into thin air. The line between landscape and law blurs. You wear what your parents wore in official spaces because the state says so, but also because the mountain says so. Fabric cut to move on stairs and trails, to sit on floors, to withstand wind that sneaks under doors. The old trade routes created habits that modern policy later hardened. Control the pass, control the price, control the story. In the 20th century, when planes and television promised instant connection, Bhutan looked at its own map and saw an argument for delay. You can't ban invention, but you can price time. You can insist on a guide on the trail, a permit for the ridge, a fee for a look at the view. The trail already narrows, you make it narrower and call it protection. What nobody knew in the valleys during those earlier decades, when news arrived as rumor and decisions traveled with ministers in jeeps, is how long that buffer could last. Weather buys you weeks, terrain buys you years, but the world found a way to float over mountains, signals, satellites, fiber running sly along the same roads bulldozers cut. Before that signal arrived, geography trained the state. It showed how to calibrate contact, open the gate in the morning, close it before dark, know the faces who pass. That muscle memory turns into doctrine when leaders believe their landscape is a teacher. When later kings framed national goals, the Himalayas weren't background, they were the blueprint. Not everyone gets a fortress for free. Bhutan did. It turned cliffs into policy. It made the slow lane a value. It wrote a constitution that speaks of forests as obligations, and it apologized to no one for distance. Yet the same ridges that shelter also squeeze. Trucks with cement wait behind muddy switchbacks. Ambulances crawl. A storm can turn a hospital transfer into a vigil. This was the moment everything changed. The realization that the wall lets you choose more than it lets you stop. Geography gave the option. Politics would become the instructions taped beside the gate. The birth of a philosophy, gross national happiness. To understand the instructions beside that gate, we need to step into a quiet room in the 1970s, where a young monarch watched a country with few roads and many rituals ask what progress should look like. Jigme Singh Wangchuck was in his teens when he took the throne in 1972. He'd seen neighbors measure themselves in factories and 5-year plans. He looked at steep valleys and monasteries that counted seasons, not quarters, and said something simple that would echo for decades: we'll pursue gross national happiness. First, it wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a posture. The idea landed as a sentence reported in newspapers, then hardened into pillars. If you're going to say happiness matters more than output, you need to show what you mean. Bhutan's answer became 4: sustainable development, cultural preservation, good governance, and environmental conservation. Not as slogans, but as a map for choices. Do you blast a road along a cliff? Only if the forest survives. Do you welcome neon and sitcoms? Only if the language and clothes still fit the halls of government. This was the moment everything changed, because a philosophy became policy. Over time, researchers in Thimphu and visiting academics built the GNH Index, a complex survey that asks about health, education, time use, cultural participation, psychological well-being, and more, tapping core drivers of satisfaction, status, and meaning that people share everywhere. Households answer questions that would never show up in a GDP ledger. Do you volunteer? How often do you pray? Do you feel safe at night? Do you feel your time is respected? The state didn't abandon cash, it reframed it. Money is one instrument in a larger orchestra. You can be richer and worse off if you lose the tune. Action followed in places you can touch. The Constitution, drafted under the same king and adopted in 2008, commits the country to keep at least 60% of its land under forest cover forever. That's not marketing. It's a legal promise you can test by satellite. In offices and schools, traditional dress, go for men, kira for women, remains required, a daily ritual that puts fabric where philosophy lives. In classrooms, Zonka holds priority even as English drives global exams. GNH isn't a museum plaque. It's a dress code, a forest clause, a planning meeting where a road alignment shifts to spare a ridge. Meanwhile, something else was happening beneath the surface. GNH became a brand as much as a belief. Delegations flew in to study it, leaders flew out to speak about it. The phrase offered a moral shield for moving slowly. If a dam took longer because resettlement was careful, that could be happiness. If a TV tower came late, that could be happiness. The story turned lack into choice. In a region where modernity often crashed into identity, Bhutan argued for pacing, not rejection. We're not poor because we can't. We're selective because we choose. But there was one problem baked into the phrasing. Happiness sounds soft. It invites cynicism. You can measure kilowatts. Can you measure contentment without telling people how to feel? Psychologically, happiness triggers status comparisons and suspicion if trade-offs aren't explicit. The index tried. It sliced well-being into domains and thresholds, then tracked them over time. Policymakers used it to test proposals. Would a new policy raise the share of people who say they have enough time to rest, who attend local festivals, who trust their institutions? It wasn't perfect, but it gave ministers a knob to turn that wasn't just growth at any cost. Micro-stories make the philosophy real and relatable. A planning officer briefs a village on a road diversion that preserves a sacred grove at the cost of 20 extra minutes to market. A ranger counts black-necked cranes in winter because their arrival signals ecosystem health. A civil servant folds his go in a government hallway, then steps into a meeting about hospital staffing ratios. None of these moments say happiness out loud. They live it by taking trade-offs seriously and writing them down. What nobody knew at the time was how much pressure that framework would face once the gates opened wider. In 1999, when TV and the internet arrived, aspiration got new channels. Later, when Hydropower debt swelled and youth looked abroad, happiness had to account for plane tickets. Still, the pillars held shape. Sustainable development meant pausing some projects or pricing tourism high. Cultural preservation meant sometimes telling a teenager to swap a hoodie for a go before an exam. Environmental conservation meant elephants eating maize would trigger a compensation claim, not a cull. Good governance, the fourth pillar, quietly did heavy lifting. Under royal guidance, Bhutan moved to constitutional democracy in 2008. Elections began, cabinets changed, and the monarchy stayed popular by stepping back from daily power while steering the long arc. That made GNH feel less like royal decree and more like a national habit. You could argue with policies without arguing with belonging. Here's where it gets hard. Happiness as policy looks wise when the world waits. When the world rushes, it can feel like a break. Youth logging into Classes C salaries in Melbourne and Vancouver. Farmers filing crop loss claims want faster payouts. Hotel owners built for high-value tourists don't fill rooms after fee hikes. GNH doesn't disappear in these frustrations, it gets tested. The same logic that kept forests standing has to explain empty dining rooms and packed IELTS centers. And yet the blueprint still reads clearly from the mountains. If you must open, open on terms that keep the pillars upright. Charge for access so numbers stay low. Teach children to speak the national language and a global one. Count trees like assets. Use surveys to catch loneliness before it becomes policy failure. The philosophy doesn't ban the modern world, it tells it to wipe its feet. To carry that posture into money and borders, Bhutan needed a lever. It found one in price. If happiness is the goal, you discourage the kind of contact that erodes it and encourage the kind that pays for schools without scuffing festivals. That's where tourism stops being a postcard and becomes a gate with numbers on it. Pricing the world out, high-value, low-impact tourism. To turn philosophy into a lever, Bhutan set a price on entry, not a ticket at the border, a daily system. For years, the rule was simple on paper and strict in practice. Visitors booked through licensed operators, traveled with guides, and paid a minimum package rate that worked out to about $250 a day. That money covered hotels, meals, transport, and a royalty to the state. The message wasn't subtle. If you want to come carefully, come with context, and pay for the privilege. Fewer feet on trails, more money for schools. The intent had layers. Culture isn't a museum, but it frays if you flood it. A high price kept numbers manageable and filtered for travelers who'd respect monasteries as living places, not sets. It also solved a hard problem fast: foreign exchange. With few exports beyond hydropower, tourism became a clean artery. A trekker in a quiet valley could subsidize a clinic 2 districts away. The country chose impact per visitor over volume. Guides became interpreters of place, not just route finders. Hotels learned to sell quiet. Action looked practical. Tour operators crafted itineraries with dzongs, festivals, and treks, then ran them through a licensing maze designed to keep standards high. Guides trained in etiquette and history. Villages near routes learned the rhythms of tourist seasons without losing their own. There were rules about where you could go, what you could wear in sacred courtyards, and how you behaved around butter lamps. This wasn't just logistics. It was a choreography meant to keep a line between ritual and show. Meanwhile, something else was happening in ledgers and lobbies. The system worked well enough that investment followed. Mid-range and boutique hotels multiplied, banking on predictable flows of high-value, low-impact guests. The daily minimum felt like a guarantee. Then the floor shifted. After the pandemic slammed borders shut and wiped calendars clean, Bhutan reopened with a different instrument, a Sustainable Development Fee, SDF, charged per person per night, on top of accommodation and services. The number jumped. Suddenly, the price wasn't embedded in a package, it was a meter ticking. Intent didn't change: protect culture, protect nature, fund public goods, but the market did. Behavioral reality check, price anchors expectations, and a visible meter, the SDF feels like a toll unless value is shown fast. Affluent visitors paused. Budget travelers looked elsewhere. Neighbors offered open visas and cut-rate deals. Bhutan asked for patience and cash. The result in the short term was a paradox. Hotels built to insulate culture from crowds stood half-empty, their staff waiting by polished desks. The principle held, the balance sheet wobbled. Stakes got real for people with names. A family who'd taken a loan to expand 5 rooms into 10 now watched occupancy hover at a trickle. Guides who knew the migration patterns of cranes and the etiquette at Panakadizong picked up part-time work, their radios silent. Villages that had learned to host a small, steady stream now saw weeks pass with nobody asking for Amadachi recipes. Protecting culture by raising the drawbridge started to feel like starving the guards. But there was a reason to keep the gate narrow. Bhutan's trails remained pristine, monasteries didn't drown in selfie sticks. Festivals in places like Paro and Thimphu still pulsed with local meaning, even if schedules bent a little for outside eyes. The country preserved the one thing most destinations spend fortunes trying to rebuild once it's lost: authenticity. The price was a tool to keep that intact. Still, tools can be tuned. As debates swelled, officials adjusted, promotions on the SDF for longer stays, limited reductions to tempt travelers back without abandoning the model. Operators experimented with itineraries that emphasized community benefit, homestays vetted for standards, craft workshops that paid artisans directly, conservation treks where fees supported anti-poaching patrols. The lesson was clear. You can charge for access, but you have to show what the money does. Forest guards on payrolls, bridges repaired after monsoon, clinics stocked before peak trekking season. What nobody knew at the time was how quickly social media would shift expectations. Travelers used to open borders bristled at forms and fees, but a different cohort leaned in, those who wanted fewer people on trails, who valued a guide explaining why a prayer wheel spins clockwise and when not to point a camera. High value, low impact became a filter not just for wallets, but for behavior. Fewer arrivals, less noise, deeper attention. Micro-stories kept the stakes human. A guide stood outside Paro's airport, scanning a short arrivals list and calling his kids to say he'd be home for dinner. A hotel manager kept lights dim in empty corridors to save power while explaining the SDF to a couple at check-in, proud and apologetic at once. A village archery captain rescheduled a local match because a small group of visitors wanted to watch, then laughed when the visitors clapped at the wrong moments and taught them to cheer. The model's logic never claimed to be easy. It asked the world to slow down and pay up, then promised a kind of encounter that mass tourism can't deliver, a monastery where you hear the bell, a trail where you hear your breath. It also asked Bhutan to absorb volatility, pandemics, currency swings, traveler tastes, and to keep telling its story as a choice, not a scarcity. High price, low impact, steady dignity. But there was one problem no fee could fix. Tourism is a valve, not a foundation. When youth looked outward for salaries and adventure, a quiet hotel couldn't compete with a visa to Sydney. The gate could meter visitors, it couldn't meter aspiration. And as the signal from 1999 spread through phones in every valley, the script would have to adapt again. The switch gets flipped, 1999, and the first broadcast. The first pictures arrive like weather. It's June 1999, silver rain threads the roofs in Thimphu, and living rooms glow with boxes that were once illegal. Curiosity spikes, novelty bias does the rest. A royal announcement marks the occasion, television and the internet are now permitted. The country inhales. For years, the walls were mountains. Tonight, the wall is light. Stakes aren't abstract, they sit on the floor, cross-legged. In one house, grandparents keep counting prayer beads while a nephew fiddles with a remote, trying not to skip the channels that carry news from Delhi and music videos from Seoul. Culture doesn't vanish because a signal lands, but it shifts the air in the room. The monks will still chant in the morning. The kid will still go to school in a go. But between those moments, there's cricket, Bollywood, a Premier League match called in a language he already speaks. Action looks simple on paper. Satellite dishes sprout like cautious mushrooms on balconies, status symbols as much as signal. Cafes paste handwritten internet signs in windows. the connection crawling through a narrow pipeline that groans every time a new PC whirs to life. The first national broadcaster fills its grid with a mix: local bulletins, imported movies, carefully chosen programs that suggest a shape to the day. The censors don't swing hammers, they tune. Content is curated the way entry gates once were, not fully open, not fully closed. Meanwhile, something else is happening in shops and alleys. Video rental racks appear beside prayer flags, their covers shouting in fonts no one used here before. A shopkeeper in Thimphu who once sold incense and butter lamps now stacks DVDs and football jerseys behind the counter. On weekends, streets that used to quiet after dusk pick up a new rhythm. Kids debating which striker is the best, aunties comparing Korean dramas, uncles swapping jokes from a sitcom that no minister planned to import. This was the moment everything changed, because aspiration found pictures. It's one thing to hear about a world beyond the pass. It's another to see a city you'll never visit lit like noon at midnight. Youth who'd grown up measuring distance in switchbacks now learned to measure it in buffering bars. The internet was slow, but it was there, and it moved faster than a convoy on a mountain road. Impact arrives in schools first. English, already a tool, becomes a door you can feel under your hand. Teachers begin competing with screens for attention, then borrowing the screen's energy to teach. A geography lesson turns into a website tour of the Amazon. A civics class ends with a clip from Parliament in another democracy. A Zonka teacher asks students to translate a pop lyric and cringes at the slang, then smiles when the metaphor lands. There was one problem. The same stream that carries a World Cup also carries advertising, celebrity gossip, and a different set of values about success and speed. The dress code at the office still says Kira. The video says denim and a haircut from a mall in Bangkok. The monastery still expects a bowed head. The talk show teaches raised eyebrows and snappy comebacks. Cultural preservation, once enforced by distance, now needs arguments, stories, and a steady hand on the programming schedule. Governance adapts. Media laws appear, standards are drafted, and a state accustomed to guiding roads learns how to guide a feed, shaping attention, not just access. It's not a ban, it's a filter. Broadcasters get nudges about timing and tone. Editors learn the line between critique and offense without seeing it written down. Self-censorship grows in small choices: an image replaced, a headline softened, a story delayed until a ministry calls back. The smile stays, the boundaries move. Micro-stories carry the tension. A monk in Punakha catches a cricket score on a borrowed phone, pockets it, then rings a bell for evening prayers. A teenager in Funsholing watches a K-pop dance tutorial, practices in secret, and wears his Go sharper the next morning. A civil servant drafts a memo about online conduct, then forwards a YouTube clip he knows will get a laugh, hoping the joke doesn't cross a line he can't fully define. What nobody knew at the time was how quickly phones would swallow the living room. For a few years, television felt containable: schedules, channels, a set. Then data plans got cheaper, and screens slipped into pockets. The gate that opened with a ceremony now lives in palms and pushes alerts at dawn. Still, the 1999 flip set the template. The state would welcome technology but pace it. Citizens would absorb the world but keep a foot on the monastery floor. That balance isn't a compromise you write once. It's a daily practice, a broadcaster deciding whether to air a contentious debate, a parent negotiating homework, and a match that goes to penalties, a policymaker staring at a graph of youth engagement and asking what to do next. The signal got in, the mountain didn't move. Both facts are true, and the real story is the choreography between them. Governance as gatekeeper, soft authoritarianism with a smile. When the signal arrived, the referee followed. Governance in Bhutan didn't slam doors, it arranged furniture, quietly managing social norms where shame and pride often regulate better than fines. Under the same royal line that coined happiness, the country stepped into constitutional democracy in 2008, not by revolt, but by invitation. The fourth king, Jigme Singye Wangchuck, ceded executive power, wrote limits on the monarchy into law, and taught citizens how to vote before asking them to do it. Then his son, Jigme Kesar Namgyal Wangchuck, took the throne with a mandate that sounded paradoxical: protect change from chaos. Stakes lived in quiet rooms. A nation with many languages needed a common voice. A state with sacred sites needed secular rules that respected them. If cohesion frays, the terrain that once helped unify becomes a set of echo chambers, valley by valley, the answer wasn't force, it was choreography. Keep the rituals visible, keep the debate orderly, keep the center kind. Action looked like norms, not knocks. Dress codes weren't nostalgia, they were policy. In ministries, courts, and schools, men wear the go, women the kira. It isn't a costume, it's a daily handshake with identity. The national language, Zonka, holds priority in public life even as English powers exams and jobs. Civil servants learn to greet in Zonka, brief in English, and switch without announcing it. These choices seem small until you imagine them gone. Meanwhile, something else shaped the mood. Elections arrived with referees trained by the palace. Two major parties emerged and traded power. Cabinets turned over, the sky didn't fall. The monarchy's popularity didn't dip because it stepped back with grace and stepped in only for the long arc: education reforms, land redistribution, disaster relief. Legitimacy stopped being a claim and became a habit. That habit made soft boundaries easier to keep. But there was one problem: boundaries need enforcement even when everyone smiles. Soft power relies on social proof. When a few break ranks, the norm weakens fast. Media houses, small, underfunded, proud, learned the perimeter by feeling for it. Nobody banned investigative reporting, nobody needed to. A critical headline might wait for context. A hard-edged editorial might soften in the second draft. Journalists traded notes on which ministries returned calls and which didn't, on when to push, on how to phrase a question without sounding like an attack. The result wasn't silence, it was a lower volume with fewer spikes. Civic rituals filled the space where shouting might have gone. National Day speeches stitched history to policy. Clean elections, campaigns taught voters to say no to gifts without making a scene. Students stood straighter on Mondays while the flag rose and the anthem carried across schoolyards. These moments weren't propaganda, they were glue. They told a country hurtling through exams, remittances, and roadworks that it was still one thing. Micro-stories keep the texture honest. A district officer straightens his go and leads a consultation on a bridge realignment. Elders thank him in Zonka, and he answers in the same language before switching to English for an engineering detail. A young reporter drafts a piece about a procurement dispute, calls 3 sources, then waits for a 4th because running it without balance feels risky. A TV producer chooses a panel on youth jobs, invites a minister and an entrepreneur, and leaves a labor organizer off the list, not by order, but by instinct. Good governance, the 4th pillar, earned its name by being visible when it counted. The 2008 Constitution capped royal prerogatives, set term limits, created an independent election commission, and wrote forests into law. Courts took on cases that once would have stalled in corridors. Parliament televised debates, awkward at first, then sharper, always respectful. The point wasn't to mimic a louder democracy, it was to grow one suited to thin air. Still, governance as gatekeeper had to manage heat. Online spaces raised the temperature a few degrees. Diaspora voices, less bound by courtesy, pushed on topics that felt sensitive at home: land, loans, favoritism. The state responded with guidelines and occasional warnings. Defamation remained on the books. A few cases reminded everyone of the line. Most days, the line held because people chose to hold it. Here's where it gets complicated. Soft authority works when trust is high and delivery is steady. It frays when jobs lag, when debt headlines multiply, when a friend posts from Sydney with a salary that's hard to ignore. The same tone that calms in crisis can feel like hush in frustration. A graduate wants clearer answers, not just courtesies. A hotelier wants a policy tweak, not a proverb. And yet the model keeps buying time. In a region where rage often sits just below the news ticker, Bhutan's public sphere feels like a mountain river, controlled, channeled, occasionally flooding, rarely poisoned. Ministers resign when storms hit their portfolios. Apologies happen in full view. The palace appears at funerals and landslides, not rallies. Authority remains intimate enough to be human and distant enough to be stable. What nobody knew at the time was how much that stability would cost in optionality. When a government calculates risk, it prefers the known. Hydropower buyers you can call, tourists you can count, institutions you can lean on. But youth don't plan in 5-year chunks. They decide in DMs and deadlines, and they vote with plane tickets. Governance can gatekeep the flow of information and the pace of policy, but it can't gatekeep the restlessness of a generation raised on broadband. This was the moment everything shifted a degree. The smile stayed, the gate kept working, and pressure began to leak where gates don't reach: the economy. Hydropower dreams, dependency reality. Follow the river and you'll find the plan and the cognitive trap. Big, visible projects, dams win attention over smaller, distributed bets, startups, microgrids, because of salience. Bhutan's water falls fast, dropping from ice to paddies in a few tight miles. Engineers saw megawatts in every gorge. Ministers saw schools lit without diesel. Neighbors saw a steady export that fit neatly on a shared grid. Hydropower felt like destiny written in gradient. Build dams, sell electricity to India, fund happiness with a river's gravity. Stakes were personal and national at once. If rivers became revenue, the state could pay teachers, stock clinics, and pave hairpins without courting smokestacks. If the bet went wrong, if costs rose, if timelines slipped, if a single buyer squeezed, then debt would sit like moss on every budget line. Villages in future reservoir zones waited for notices. Young men eyed construction sites for jobs. Banks watched interest clocks. Action started with surveys and blast caps. Chukka, then Tala, then Mangdechu, names that became shorthand for entire eras of optimism. Indian public sector firms arrived with blueprints and teams. Concessional loans followed. Joint ventures set tariffs that assumed smooth monsoons and predictable politics. Roads widened to carry turbines the size of buses. Tunnels ate into slopes. Camps appeared where only herders had known the stars. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the spreadsheets. Costs crept. Rock turned out harder than estimates. Landslides reset schedules. Transmission lines across tough terrain needed more towers, more steel, more time. Every delay added interest. Revenue projections squinted down a longer tunnel. The arithmetic stayed positive on paper, but the margin for breath tightened. This was the moment everything shifted, because dependence revealed itself in invoices. Loss aversion kicked in. Once the hydropower path was sunk cost heavy, pivoting felt riskier than doubling down. India wasn't just the biggest customer, it was essentially the only customer, the financier, and often the builder. A good monsoon and Bhutan's treasury smiled. A dry year or a maintenance shutdown, and the smile dimmed. Price negotiations felt friendly, then firm. When a neighbor buys almost everything you make, you don't haggle the way a free agent does. Impact rolled through budgets. Hydropower came to dominate foreign earnings, concentrating hope in a few canyon walls. Other sectors watched as attention, talent, and credit flowed to concrete. A young entrepreneur with a software idea struggled to compete with salaries at a dam project. A farmer asked whether the feeder road to her terraces would come before the next turbine convoy. Ministers suddenly spoke two timescales: fiscal years for everything else, commissioning dates for power. Micro-stories carried the weight. A family in a hillside hamlet packed pots into sacks as surveyors marked a future shoreline. Compensation was promised, a relocation site sketched, jobs suggested, months stretched. The father worked as a day laborer at the site, walking past his old fields each morning under new dust. The kids learned a new route to a different school, their friendships reset by a reservoir's edge. The electricity that would later hum into cities felt abstract in a kitchen lit by a single bulb. But there was a reason the bet made sense. Hydropower is clean, domestic, and hard to steal. Dams don't import coal. Turbines don't cough. Bhutan's carbon math stayed saintly even as lights brightened. In a region of brown air that mattered. It fit the forest clause, fit GNH, fit a story where nature pays the bills without being stripped. Still, the single-buyer reality cast a long shadow. Transmission bottlenecks inside India could delay Bhutan's cash even when water roared. Policy shifts across the border, subsidies here, market reforms there, reached into Thimphu's treasury without crossing a line on a map. New projects penciled in higher costs because wages and steel rose globally. Each dollar borrowed for a tunnel counted against the same national balance sheet that paid nurses. What nobody knew at the time was how long mega-project logic would crowd out small alternatives. Microhydro schemes that could have served distant valleys waited because the big dams promised national returns. Solar glinted on rooftops mostly as a statement, not a plan. When pandemic restrictions slowed construction, Workers idled and timelines slipped again. Debt graphs ticked up. Patience felt thinner in ministries where youth emigration files stacked higher. And yet the river kept offering itself. Mangdechu finally spun, and money did arrive. Loan terms, often concessional, kept burdens manageable on paper. India remained a friend and anchor in a tough neighborhood, its grid a reliable sink for Bhutan's monsoon surge. Engineers learned more with each project. Regulators got savvier. Environmental safeguards tightened after early missteps with fish and silt. Here's where it gets complicated. Hydropower stabilizes what it also narrows. The state can project steady revenue in good years and plan clinics and classrooms accordingly. But a development model leaning on a handful of canyons becomes exquisitely sensitive to shocks. A landslide in one valley, a policy pivot next door, a monsoon that arrives late. Meanwhile, graduates fluent in code and marketing don't see themselves in hard hats and boots. The dream didn't die, it matured. Talk turned to diversifying buyers in the long term, to wheeling power deeper into regional markets as cross-border rules evolve. Officials floated adding solar to complement dry season flows, modernizing grids, and nurturing industries that use clean power at home, data services, cold storage, even carefully chosen manufacturing. The river could do more than export electrons, it could anchor a broader base. But there was one problem a turbine can't solve: time. Every dam takes years, every loan decades, while youth make decisions in months. Hydropower funds happiness in theory. In practice, it pays salaries after a commissioning ceremony. In the gap, a plane to Melbourne beckons. The river's gravity is steady, the humankind is. The youth question: emigration, unemployment, expectation. The river could wait for turbines, youth couldn't. In coffee shops in Thimphu and classrooms in Jelefu, the timeline felt off by a decade. Degrees stacked up: business, nursing, IT, while vacancies sat thin on job boards. Employers wanted experience, graduates had transcripts. The state offered training schemes and placements. Contracts ended, the search restarted. Patience, once a national virtue, began to feel like a tax only the young paid. Stakes weren't abstract, they were calendar dates. IELTS test slots sold out weeks ahead. Agencies booked halls to brief families on pathways to Australia, Canada, Japan. A nurse in her 20s sold her car to fund fees and flights, telling herself it was a bridge, not a goodbye. A teacher counted service years toward pension and still printed a visa checklist. Parents nodded in support and checked exchange rates after dinner. Action moved fast once a path became a pattern. Mimetic desire, seeing peers succeed abroad, turned individual choices into a crowded exit lane. English medium schooling, already a ladder, turned into a runway. Social media looped success stories. Cousins landing in Perth, roommates sharing rental hacks in Brisbane, remittances hitting bank accounts back home. A WhatsApp group could move a cohort across oceans in a season. Agencies multiplied, some diligent, some opportunistic, promising placements and processing. Exam centers buzzed, courier counters stacked documents stamped urgent. Meanwhile, something else was happening in offices and shops. Businesses struggled to hold staff long enough to train them. Hotels reopened from the pandemic to find their best receptionists gone. Clinics juggled rosters. Restaurants cut hours or raised wages and still watched baristas leave after 6 months with a farewell cake and an Australia flag emoji on Instagram. The economy developed a draft, pulling talent outward the way a river pulls a leaf through a rapid. This was the moment everything changed, because emigration turned from escape to plan. Families reframed leaving as investment, not loss, future focus beating place attachment. It stopped being a secret and became a family strategy. Remittances rose and softened bills. School fees paid on time, a roof repaired before monsoon, a cousin's medical trip funded without a loan. At the same time, communities thinned in odd places. A school assembly stood shorter by winter. A football team struggled to field substitutes. A village festival needed to train new dancers because the old ones were now stacking shelves in a distant supermarket. Impact cut both ways inside homes. Pride mixed with ache. A grandmother learned to video call, squinting into a screen while a grandson in a winter jacket described a night shift. A father carried his daughter's luggage to the airport gate and walked back out alone, past a poster of a smiling tourist he'd never meet. The country's story, we go slow on purpose, met a generation's story, we can't afford slow, and neither was wrong. But there was one problem hidden in the hope. Skills mismatched at both ends. Degrees earned for a small, policy-led economy didn't always translate neatly abroad. A business graduate learned care work, an engineer took warehouse shifts, a nurse found her credentials needed bridging courses. Back home, an entrepreneur needed a coder and found only CVs of people planning to leave in March. Training pipelines looked busy, outcomes looked sideways. Government responses tried to catch up without breaking the frame. Programs promoted entrepreneurship, subsidized startups, and pitched remote work. IT services delivered from Bhutan to clients abroad. Ministers talked about hubs, digital visas, sandboxes. It made sense on paper, export brains without exporting bodies. Then a connection dropped mid-pitch, or a global client asked for 24/7 support, and the team couldn't staff nights because 2 members had visa interviews next week. The idea wasn't wrong, the timing was cruel. Micro-stories marked the strain. A young coder toggled between a go for a morning meeting and a hoodie for a late-night client call, a suitcase open under his desk. An English teacher practiced phonetics with students while answering a message from a friend in Sydney offering a couch for the first month. A civil servant approved a small grant for a bakery, ate a bun at the launch, and learned the owner had a flight in 6 weeks. What nobody knew at the time was how quickly departure would loop back as influence. Diaspora networks began sponsoring siblings, advising on course choices, warning about scams, sending back not just cash, but expectations about service, transparency, speed. A municipal office introduced online forms after a torrent of complaints that felt imported and accurate. The state's courteous pace met a population trained by foreign portals to expect confirmation emails in minutes. Here's where it gets complicated. Immigration can be a pressure valve and a wound. Remittances stabilize families and inflate rents. Vacancies force wage rises that help those who stay and hurt small businesses. A hospital loses a nurse and gains a donor who funds equipment. The ledger won't settle quickly. What the country can control is the story it tells the young, that leaving isn't betrayal, that returning isn't failure, that circling back with skills counts as belonging. The river still falls, turbines still wait, and youth still refresh email. The choice now isn't between staying and modernity, it's between defining modernity on Bhutanese terms and renting it abroad on someone else's. Borders of convenience, India, China, and the squeeze. While youth weighed plane tickets, the borders kept their own calendar. Proximity bias favored the south, daily conveniences with India shaped habits more than distant risks to the north. To the south, fences were more like rhythms, Bhutan's life pulsed with India's. To the north, the wall stayed higher, a snowbound line with politics folded into every ridge. Geography set the terms, history wrote the footnotes, policy tried to keep both from spilling. Stakes here are sovereignty with receipts. Bhutan's economy breathes through India, fuel, food, cement, currency stability, grid connections, trade routes. In Phuncholing, the gate is less a door than a metronome, open at dawn, thrum all day, slow by night. Trucks roll in with onions and diesel, roll out with timber, fruit, and electrons priced in agreements lawyers can recite from memory. Disruptions aren't theoretical, their shelves empty by afternoon. Action writes itself in small shutdowns and big standoffs. When the Doklam Plateau flared in 2017, Indian and Chinese troops staring down over a road on a Bhutan-claimed ridge, Bhutan stood in the middle without moving a boot. Maps became breaking news. The whole point of a buffer is not to be a battlefield, but the road building saved for remote valleys suddenly felt like an argument on your doorstep. In border villages, farmers measured fields with an eye on where a patrol might appear. In Thimphu, statements stayed careful and brief. Meanwhile, something else shaped the southward tilt. Currency matters. The Ngultram is pegged to the Indian rupee. That peg buys predictability and sells a little flexibility. Fuel prices track Indian policy shifts. A refinery glitch across the border can turn into queues at pumps in Thimphu by evening. The link is intimate. Shared electricity markets, shared banking channels, shared crises when a pandemic or a ban or a truckers strike ripples outward. Most days, it's convenience. Some days, it's constraint. This was the moment everything narrowed because the northern frontier stayed largely closed by design. Bhutan doesn't have formal diplomatic relations with China, Talks happen in careful rounds about maps and markers few citizens will ever see. The high passes that once ferried salt and stories from Tibet now carry patrols and caution. A road carved on the wrong side of a ridge can reframe a century in a week. For a small state, ambiguity is shelter, clarity can be exposure. Impact lands at the market stall as well as the ministry. A road closure at Jaegyeon changes egg prices by lunchtime. A customs tweak makes a contractor recalculate a bid. A diesel shortage reshuffles wedding dates because guests can't drive from distant districts. In the east, Samdrup Jongkar's tempo mirrors Assam's. When unrest flares across the line, shutters come down this side too. Politics becomes weather, and everyone learns to carry an umbrella. But there was one problem beneath the comfort of routine. Dependency hardens habits. When almost all imports and most exports flow through one neighbor, diversification becomes a slogan that never quite leaves the whiteboard. Bhutan talks about opening more to Bangladesh, about air links that skip roads, about northern trade that is cultural and cautious. Each idea makes sense, then hits the same limits: terrain, trust, and the need not to jostle a friendship that keeps lights on and prices steady. Security threads through meals and meetings. Indian military training support, joint exercises, intelligence sharing. These aren't headline drama, they're daily cooperation that keeps stray dangers from climbing a valley. It creates a comfort that's also a weight. Hard to say no to the hand that steadies you on a narrow trail. Harder still to pretend you don't need the hand. Bhutan's diplomacy learned a tone: warm, grateful, independent, and pointedly quiet where microphones could make trouble. Micro-stories reveal the texture. A shopkeeper in Phuncholing tracks rupee cash on one side of a ledger and digital ngultram on the other, bridging systems with a smile and a mental calculator. A trucker times his run to beat a bund in West Bengal, sleeping in his cab at the gate so he can cross at first light. A border town doctor texts a counterpart across in India about a medicine shortfall. A courier crosses with a packet the next morning, not because a treaty mandates it, but because habit does. What nobody knew at the time was how the frontier would also shape identity at home. The South looks outward daily, hears Hindi and Nepali in the same morning, swaps recipes and remittances, and lives with the knowledge that a policy in Delhi can change lunch prices. The West and Central districts feel the tug differently, through Hydropower invoices and festival calendars that sometimes bend to visiting dignitaries' schedules. The North remains a story told in classrooms and negotiation rooms, not in markets. Here's where it gets complicated. To be landlocked isn't just to be without a coast, it's to share your breath with neighbors' lungs. Bhutan has turned that into a kind of art, align deeply with India without becoming a dependency cartoon, talk with China without blinking, and keep the national temperature low. It works until it doesn't, and the fix usually comes in the same forms. Another meeting, another memo, another reminder that stability is a choice you make every day. Meanwhile, pressures from youth emigration and hydropower timelines loop back into the border arithmetic. The more people leave, the more remittances arrive through Indian banks. The more dams spin, the more the grid interlocks. Each step deeper into convenience tightens the squeeze. Sovereignty holds, but its margins are managed, not expanded. The gate that closed on the TV crew at the start of our story wasn't just about cameras. It was about this whole equation: what enters easily, what never does, and who gets to decide when the convenience becomes a cost. The forgotten chapter: refugees and identity. Internal borders don't show on maps, they run through memory. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Bhutan made a choice that still sits like a stone in the national throat. In the southern belt lived Lhotshampa, Nepali-speaking communities whose families had farmed there for decades, some since the early 20th century, others newer arrivals from labor migrations. As the state tightened cultural policy, dress codes, language priority, citizenship documentation, southern towns felt the screws first. Stakes looked like paperwork at the counter and soldiers at the door. A 1985 nationality law, followed by a 1988 census, asked families to prove roots to 1958, tightening identity around documents rather than lived presence. For many, records were scattered or lost, land inherited without deeds, names spelled one way at school and another on a tax slip. Categories appeared: genuine citizens, returned migrants, non-nationals. A bureaucratic line became a village fault. Protests rose, curfews followed, clashes spread. Fear did the rest. Action moved along roads to the east and south. Trucks took families toward the Mechai River as officials insisted departures were voluntary. Testimonies from those who left described pressure, arrests, and forms signed under duress. By the early 199s, tens of thousands had crossed into Nepal, where camps appeared in the lowland heat, Beldangi, Goldhap, rows of bamboo, plastic roofs snapping in monsoon winds. Inside, people rebuilt routines from memory. Schools with neat handwriting, temple bells improvised from metal bowls, committees for water, for food, for dispute. The word Bhutanese traveled with them, thick and contested. Meanwhile, something else hardened back home. The national story kept its rhythm, forests protected, culture cherished, happiness indexed, while an entire southern chapter went quiet in official speeches. In Thimphu, policies focused on cohesion. In the camps, cohesion became survival. Young people grew up with a double horizon, a mountain kingdom they knew from parents' stories, and a future in countries they'd never imagined until resettlement officers arrived with clipboards and English classes. This was the moment everything bent, because third countries opened a door. Starting in 2007, the United States, Canada, Australia, and others began resettling Bhutanese refugees from Nepal by the thousands. A generation that learned to read under tarpaulins bordered plains to St. Louis, Adelaide, Toronto. New lives began in supermarkets, nursing homes, schools with mascots nobody in their families could translate. The camps emptied slowly, then suddenly, leaving fewer tents and more photos in albums. Impact ricocheted. For Bhutan, the exodus took a pressure point off the border, but left a silence at home that smarted when global human rights reports arrived. For Nepal, long a reluctant host, the resettlement thinned a humanitarian problem without settling the political question of return. For the diaspora, identity rewired itself in apartment kitchens in the Midwest. Imadachi made with American chilies, stories told in Nepali about dzongs they'd never enter again, children learning to spell Bhutanese at school while their parents debated what to call themselves now. But there was one problem no plane ticket resolved: the word we. Nationhood in Bhutan had been defined through culture, dzongkha dress, ritual. The Lhotshampa story raised a hard question about who set those terms and how flexible they could be. Officials defended policies as necessary for unity after years of porous borders and demographic change. Critics, inside whispers, outside reports, called it exclusion dressed as cohesion. Both frames still exist, often in different languages. Micro-stories keep it human. A woman in a camp holds up a faded photo of a mud-walled house with a mango tree heavy in summer, a place she can still draw from memory but can't locate on a current map. A man in Ohio unfolds a certificate from a school in Sarpang, laminated now, and tells his daughter that he once led morning assembly in a language she hears only on WhatsApp. A shopkeeper in southern Bhutan points to an empty plot next to his store and says, softly, who used to live there. What nobody knew at the time was how the refugee chapter would echo into the era of open phones. Diaspora voices, freer to speak, began posting timelines, affidavits, and demands for recognition. Inside Bhutan, the subject remained careful, a thread most avoided pulling in public. Yet the country's broader project, Modernize Without Tearing, sits next to this seam. You can't design identity as a protected artifact and ignore who paid for the glass. Here's where it gets complicated. Reconciliation doesn't fit neatly inside policies built for forests and festivals. It needs language that admits pain without reopening wounds, and space for southern pride that doesn't feel like a challenge to the highland core. Small steps matter, fairer documentation drives, room for Nepali in cultural spaces, histories taught with the blanks filled in. None of that requires abandoning cohesion. It requires broadening the circle of who gets to define it. The border that shapes most lives is still the one to India, but the line that shapes belonging runs through the south, through memory, through the choice to say we and mean more people than before. Culture under glass, preservation versus performance. Walk into a dzong on a festival day and the air hums with butter lamps and drums. Anticipation, awe, and belonging, powerful emotional cues, prime attention without a single ad. Masks with wide eyes tilt toward the courtyard. Dancers move in steps taught by monks who learn them from monks who learn them from a teacher whose name now lives in a chant. It's alive, not staged, until the timetable shifts a few minutes because a bus of visitors is running late. That's the knife edge. Keep the ritual intact, but make room for people who don't know the words yet. Stakes live in bodies and calendars. If culture hardens into glass, it stops breathing. If it loosens too much, it frays. Offices insist on go and Kira for a reason. A shared look builds a shared mood. Schools open with prayers and anthem for the same reason. But a rule can become a costume if it isn't backed by meaning. Urban youth tug at collars, asking where respect ends and performance begins. Elders answer with stories. Managers answer with memos. Both want continuity. Both worry about drift. Action looks ordinary up close. In government buildings, public servants knot cuffs and slide cabinets over shoulders before presenting budget figures on a projector. In classrooms, students switch from Zonka dictation to English science notes in the same hour. At homes, aunts fold Kira pleats while a niece scrolls a dance tutorial she won't perform at school. Festivals line up masked dances in a sequence that still pleases deities, but also helps a handful of outside guests catch the highlight before lunch. Guides whisper which moments aren't for cameras, and most visitors put phones away without fuss. Meanwhile, something else is happening behind closed doors. Urban apartments fill with things that don't fit the old calendar. Guitars, game consoles, startup pitch decks. Young people build identities with two toolkits: ritual at work and school, remix after hours. A coder drafts an app in the afternoon and practices Jonka calligraphy at night because his grandmother asked him to write a wedding invitation by hand. A rapper samples the Dranian and drops a verse about migration fees. Culture adapts without permission slips. The question is whether policy can keep up without freezing it. This was the moment everything started to feel curated because tourism's choreography seeped inward. A monastery that once timed dances to the arc of a prayer began glancing at tour schedules. A village festival added an explanatory banner near the gate to avoid repeating the same answers. Handicraft shops learned to demonstrate weaving for an audience that didn't know the difference between warp and weft, then found themselves performing the demo for local school groups who suddenly felt like tourists in their own town. Pride stayed, the angle shifted. Impact shows up in language and in silence. Zonka remains priority in public life, yet casual speech in cities slides toward English and Nepali hybrids that fit memes and work emails. Elders hear it and flinch. Teenagers hear the flinch and soften their slang in front of grandparents, then switch back outside. The policy insists on a standard. Real speech wanders. That wander isn't betrayal. It's what languages do when borders of sound meet new traffic. The risk isn't mixing, it's shaming. If kids feel scolded for how they talk less to elders, and a bridge goes missing. Micro-stories keep it honest. A young coder toggles his hoodie off when he walks into a ministry, folds into a go he keeps at the office, then changes back in a stairwell on the way to a co-working space where nobody cares what he wears as long as the build ships by Friday. A dancer performs a cham at a monastery, then uploads a clip with a caption in English, not to pander, but to reach cousins abroad who ask what the mask means. A seamstress designs a Kira with hidden pockets for phones and laughs at her own subversion. But there's one problem that rules can't solve. Audience gaze changes the thing observed. A sacred courtyard framed by a camera lens becomes a scene, even if everyone behaves. Performers feel it, villagers feel it, kids feel it most. If your first memory of a festival includes a stranger's applause at the wrong moment, you grow up editing. That's survivable in small doses, dangerous in big ones. The fix isn't to close the gate. It's to keep firm zones where performance is never asked, where tourists must be witnesses or not be there at all. Policy nudges try to protect those zones. Dress codes anchor a baseline respect. Language rules hold space for Zonka. Cultural boards review event proposals that look too glossy. Community festivals get support that isn't tied to visitor numbers. Creative grants go to artists who riff inside the scale, hip-hop that quotes proverbs, film that frames a monastery without flattening it into a postcard. The aim isn't purity, it's agency. Let the people who live the ritual decide how to show it, when, and to whom. What nobody knew at the time was how diaspora eyes would feed back into the loop. People who left for study or work began watching clips from home with a hunger that locals didn't always share. Comments filled with love and instruction: "Don't film this part, teach the meaning, we miss this sound." That remote gaze can distort too, but it also carries care. It reminds a village troop that their cousins 3 time zones away still mark the festival date in their phones. Here's where it gets complicated. Preservation framed as rules can hold a line, but the living part rides on pride and joy. If wearing a go feels like compliance, it'll slip the second the rule relaxes. If it feels like belonging, kids will wear it on days nobody asked them to. The difference comes from stories told well, elders generous with explanation, and spaces where youth shape the form without being accused of breaking it. Culture under glass breaks, culture in hands continues. The choice isn't between closed and open, it's between fragile display and resilient practice. Bhutan's bet is that people, not price tags, keep meaning intact, and that a ritual that can survive a bus running late can survive the century. The Green Mandate: forests, carbon, and trade-offs. Stand on a ridge at dawn, and the policy is the tree line. Visuals that signal permanence: forests, ridges, anchor trust better than spreadsheets. Bhutan wrote it into law: keep at least 60% of the country under forest cover, not until a target year forever. That clause isn't a slogan, it's a ceiling on chainsaws and a floor under rivers. It turns the hillside into a budget that can't be overspent, even when cash runs short. Stakes live in both numbers and nerves. Forests absorb carbon and anchor slopes that would otherwise slide after monsoon. They hold water like a savings account, releasing it through dry months into turbines that pay teachers and nurses. But wood is also warmth, and land is livelihood. A boundary around a grove protects cranes and cats, and it fences a woman's firewood walk into a longer route. Conservation buys climate credit, it also redraws a farmer's week. Action looks like lines on maps and boots on trails. Protected areas, parks, reserves, biological corridors stitch across the country so animals can move from valley to valley without crossing a highway built too close to a migration path. Community forestry hands local groups the right and the duty to manage woods near their homes, mark harvest cycles, set quotas, replant when they cut. Rangers log sightings and snares, count stumps, and learn the names villagers use for slopes outsiders call by grid code. Meanwhile, something else is happening far away from the trees. In conference halls, Bhutan stands up and says it's carbon negative, absorbing more than it emits, and offers that fact as proof that a small, developing country can lead without burning. It isn't theatrics. The grid runs on rivers. The Constitution guards the canopy. Diesel fumes still hang above a morning market, but the national ledger stays green enough to lecture bigger economies with a straight face. This was the moment everything complicated because animals don't read boundaries. When tigers and elephants return to corridors that work, they also return to fields. A farmer in the south plants maize, watches it ripen, and hears rustle where the forest meets the plot. One night becomes a raid, becomes a season of loss. Compensation schemes exist, forms, photos, verification, but money arrives after hunger. Pride bends, anger arrives first. Impact spreads in quieter ways. A road alignment shifts to spare an old-growth stand, adding travel time for a clinic run. A Hydropower line detours around a nesting site, stacking cost on a balance sheet already strained. A village that once cut beams for houses now orders prefabricated panels because the permit clock outlasts the wedding date. Trade-offs stay polite in policy papers, they ache in kitchens. Micro-stories mark the wait. A farmer wakes to find half a field flattened by elephants, ties tin cans to a line, and hopes the clatter buys one quiet night. He files a claim with the forestry office, fills boxes he's filled before, and waits while an officer measures hoofprints in damp soil. A ranger checks a camera trap and grins at a tiger's shoulder passing close, then remembers the meeting at noon where he'll face a room of tired faces asking why their fences failed again. But there's a reason the mandate holds. Forests are Bhutan's slow inheritance. They cool valleys, they make rain linger, they cradle monasteries no engineer could anchor on bare rock. In a century that will punish countries for chopping, holding the line is a bet on future leverage. Carbon markets that pay for standing trees, tourism that values silence, watersheds that keep turbines spinning even when glaciers retreat. The forest clause looks moral, it behaves like strategy. Still, policy had to evolve. Community forestry wasn't just goodwill, it was governance. Give locals stakes and they'll guard better than distant officers can. Controlled harvesting, fire breaks maintained before dry season, patrols led by people who recognize a poacher's footprints. Where that model works, suspicion drops. Where it doesn't, resentment creeps like lianas. What nobody knew at the time was how international praise could backfire at home. Carbon negative sounds like a trophy until a family asks why their development permit sits under that trophy gathering dust. Youth read headlines about climate leadership and then read job listings that don't match their degrees. The pride is real, so is the impatience. Here's where it gets delicate. Markets now offer to pay for carbon left in trunks and soil. Deals promise revenue if trees keep breathing undisturbed. That money could prop clinics and schools, could fund faster compensation for crop loss, could make the mandate feel like shared wealth instead of a rural burden. But contracts can also trap. Price volatility, verification costs, outsiders lecturing about baselines. One bad deal could turn a forest into paperwork. And yet the path forward still runs under shade. Plant along riverbanks, thin carefully to prevent catastrophic fires as climate shifts. Let villages earn from non-timber products, mushrooms, oils, herbs, so protection pays monthly, not just morally. Teach kids forestry science alongside proverbs about mountain spirits, then hire them to manage the land their grandparents revered. The mandate isn't a museum rope. It's a living rule in a living place. Trees stand because people choose them to, every season, with saws left hanging and forms filed, and fences mended and arguments held in good faith. The forest breathes. The country times itself to that breath, even when the world outside hurries. The information border, censorship, platforms, and leaks. By the time phones ate the living room, the last border wasn't a gate, it was a feed. Algorithms weaponize novelty, restraint has to be designed. Bhutan's media scene looked small and careful, lean newsrooms, thin budgets, editors who knew ministers by first name and policy by heart. The rules weren't shouted. They lived in habits. Balance your story, call for comment, avoid heat that produces more smoke than light. It kept trust high and tempers low. It also meant some questions took the long road to daylight. Stakes were simple: control the story or watch it run without you. In a country that stitched cohesion from rituals and slow policy, virality felt like a landslide. A rumor could cross valleys faster than a convoy. A video could make a village famous for the wrong reason before breakfast. The state didn't want a muzzle, it wanted a thermostat, something to cool spikes before they cracked the glass. Action looked like guidelines and nudges. Broadcasting codes emphasized respect, accuracy, and cultural sensitivity. Defamation stayed a real risk, not a relic. Editors trained young reporters to check twice, phrase once, and remember that a headline is also a temperature reading. Government pages went online with a steady stream of advisories, congratulatory notes, condolences, and policy updates written in the same calm cadence as speeches. The tone was intentional. Never let the feed become a fight. Meanwhile, something else was happening off the main stage. Telegram groups bloomed in quiet corners. WhatsApp threads braided families and office gossip. Facebook carried town hall arguments that wouldn't fit in a newspaper's column inches. Diaspora pages, far from the norms and niceties, posted scans of letters, screenshots of procurement notices, charts with arrows pointing at names. They didn't fear a phone call from a ministry asking for context. They posted the context and dared the ministry to answer. This was the moment everything tilted because leaks rewrote process. Transparency reduces rumor, but half leaks spike outrage. Outrage travels faster than nuance. A tender document that once circulated among desks now appeared at midnight on a channel with a name nobody would say out loud at work. A screenshot of a WhatsApp exchange about a staffing favor landed on timelines before the participants finished the conversation. A video clip, 30 seconds of a meeting taken out of a 2-hour discussion, set the day's agenda, and officials spent the afternoon explaining the missing hour and a half. Impact cut both ways. Bad behavior found light. A shortcut in a contract met a public that knew what the right road looked like. An abusive office message about a junior officer's accent turned into a cultural debate with teeth. Policy shifted faster after certain posts. Resignations arrived sooner than they might have without the glare. At the same time, innocent mistakes wore the same glare. A rumor about a hospital drug shortage spiked panic before a shipment cleared customs. A clip of a monk laughing with friends became fodder for strangers' moral lectures. Everyone learned to hesitate before the send button. Not everyone did. Micro-stories tracked the currents. A civil servant drafted a procurement clarification at dawn because a telegram leak misread a clause and angered a valley by breakfast. A local reporter stared at a file she'd built for weeks and watched a diaspora page publish a rougher version first, then decided whether to follow, to add nuance, or to wait and risk irrelevance. A farmer's son posted a video of elephants in his field to prove a compensation claim. A conservationist demed to ask him to blur a nest in the background. But there was one problem with treating a feed like a border. Borders have guards, feeds have algorithms. Platform rules, global, opaque, decided which posts lived or died. A respectful Zonka explainer might sink, a spicy half-truth might soar. Appeals went to forms, not people. A post taken down for graphic content could be a needed warning about landslides. A post left up, within guidelines, could be a smear crafted to fit the rules. Local law met global moderation and found little traction. Government adapted in increments. Digital literacy campaigns taught kids how to spot a fake and adults how to breathe before sharing. Fact-checking units grew in civil society, underfunded and stubborn. Police took a few cases, public harassment, clear threats, to draw lines without scaring everyone off the square. Regulators asked platforms for better escalation channels. Sometimes they got an email address, sometimes a webinar. What nobody knew at the time was how leaks would become policy tools, not just threats. A reformer inside a ministry learned that a well-timed, accidental document could push a stuck policy over the hill. A whistleblower found allies in reporters who knew how to protect a source in a town where everyone knows your uncle. The smile stayed in public. In private, the game sharpened. Here's where it gets delicate. A country that prefers courtesy now has to host argument without losing itself. The fix isn't more silence. It's more daylight with better timing. Publish draft policies before they harden. Hold Q&As that take the tough questions first. Show how an SDF rupee turns into a ranger's salary. Show how a Hydropower loan amortizes across years, not rumors. Treat the feed as the new town square and bring the same manners plus receipts. The information border won't close. It shouldn't. The work now is learning its trails, when to step in, when to step back, when to let a leak stand, and when to answer with documents, not adjectives. In a place that once measured control in passes and checkpoints, the hardest passage is a scroll that never ends. Shock to the system, pandemic, tourism collapse, policy pivots. The border didn't close with speeches, it closed with silence. In March 2020, planes stopped above Paro, festivals paused, and hotel lobbies that once smelled like butter tea went still. Guides stacked their Carter scarves in drawers. The sustainable development fee didn't matter because there were no arrivals to levy. The model that prized fewer visitors at higher value met a year with 0 visitors and no value. Stakes slid from policy to rent due. Tourism was more than postcard views. It was payrolls for drivers, bellhops, cooks, artisans. A chain built to keep culture intact. Licensed guides, vetted hotels, planned routes, collapsed like a bridge with one missing beam. Hydropower checks still landed on time, but cash that trickled through small towns dried in a week. Families who'd borrowed to upgrade rooms or buy a second vehicle eyed repayment calendars that didn't blink. Action turned to triage. The state offered relief, wage support through a stabilization fund, interest waivers to keep loans from swallowing livelihoods, food distributions in districts where markets slowed to a whisper. Volunteers, DeSoups in orange, fanned out to checkpoints, vaccination lines, quarantine facilities that grew almost overnight in school dorms and spare guest houses. The country moved like a village, small, coordinated, polite, relentless. Shots went into arms fast. The virus stayed mostly a rumor behind mountains. Meanwhile, something else was happening in balance sheets. A sector designed to manage scarcity had never planned for a vacuum. Hotels mothballed floors, boutique properties built for high-value, low-impact dimmed chandeliers and negotiated with banks. Guides delivered groceries, learned new routes as taxi drivers, or joined soup patrols at dawn. A crafts cooperative switched from selling to tourists to stitching masks with patterns that still said Bhutan even when mouths were covered. This was the moment everything bent because reopening couldn't be a rewind. When borders cracked back open in 2022, Bhutan didn't revive the old minimum package rate. It introduced a sharper tool, the Sustainable Development Fee, as a separate, visible meter. The argument was consistent. Culture and nature aren't free to maintain, and visitors should help carry the load. But the timing hurt. Neighbors waived fees and welcomed volume. Bhutan raised a flag that read value and waited. Impact showed up in empty rooms and crowded debates. Some travelers applauded clarity, you pay, you see where your money goes. Others did the math and chose Nepal or Sikkim. Arrival numbers limped. A paradox returned. The model protected what it loved and starved the people who guard it. The SDF became a proxy for harder questions: how to fund public goods when a main artery is clamped, how to signal exclusivity without drifting into isolation, how to keep promises to investors who built for a policy that evolved mid-flight. But there was one problem baked into the new meter: optics. A fee reads like a toll unless you show the bridge. So ministries started narrating, SDF to pay rangers and teachers, to repair trails after monsoon, to train guides in languages and safety. Some proof landed: restored bridges, improved waste handling at trailheads, better signage at sacred sites. It wasn't a flood, but it was a start toward trust in a number on a receipt. Policy then tuned again. Long-stay promotions offered partial SDF waivers to nudge travelers into deeper itineraries, stay more days, pay less per night, spend more with communities. Visa friction smoothed. Itineraries diversified beyond the classic West, birding in the East, weaving routes, wellness retreats that use hot springs and silence instead of spas with marble. Operators leaned into community benefit agreements, homestays that publish nightly splits, craft workshops where visitors see money go from hand to hand, conservation treks that end at ranger posts with payrolls pinned on notice boards. Micro-stories kept it real. A guide who'd driven taxis during lockdown pulled his uniform from storage, ironed it, and explained the SDF to his first clients in 2 years, hearing his voice wobble as he reached the part about why it matters. A hotelier turned a ballroom into a co-working space for locals because tourists were thin and rent didn't wait. The first client was a startup pitching to Singapore over a flaky line. A village women's group, once dependent on festival crowds, started a subscription box for diaspora families, dried chilies, hand-woven bookmarks, a note in Zonka and English. What nobody knew at the time was how much the pandemic rewired traveler taste. Scarcity and safety primed people for depth over breadth, perfect for Bhutan's few, longer, better pitch. A slice of visitors craved exactly what Bhutan sold: space, intention, a guide who could explain when not to walk past a butter lamp. Another slice wanted frictionless spontaneity and balked at forms, fees, and escorted etiquette. The first group is smaller, but they stay longer, spend more locally, and write fewer complaints. The second group still comments loudly. Here's where it gets complicated. The SDF isn't only a price, it's a promise. If the money proves visible, forest guards on payroll, clinics stocked in trekking corridors, waste managed in towns that host festivals, the model holds. If it disappears into a general fund without stories, the model sours. Bhutan doesn't need more visitors than trails can bear. It needs the right ones, at a pace that keeps meaning intact and bills paid. The shock ended the illusion that policy could freeze time. It also cleared noise. What survived, guides, knowledge, forests, calm, rituals that didn't need an audience, became the core again. The fee can change, the form can flex, but the point doesn't. Fewer feet, deeper steps, receipts that read like respect. The exit doors, visas, remittances, and hollowing towns. After the shock, the exits lit up. Australian student visas turned from rumor to routine, agents booking halls in Thimphu, Phuncholing, and Jelefu, projecting timelines like weather forecasts. Social proof did the marketing. Every departure post recruited the next. IELTS slots vanished in minutes. Parents hugged kids at dawn queues outside courier offices, documents stacked with fluorescent tabs. The departures didn't feel like escapes. They felt like schedules. Stakes showed up in chairs left empty. Classrooms with half a senior cohort gone by winter. Ward rosters rewritten twice a week. Restaurants training new servers every month. A district office lost 3 clerks to Brisbane and cut its service counters to 2. A Hydropower contractor raised wages and still watched welders leave with farewell tea and a promise to send photos. The economy learned the sound of suitcase wheels on tile. Action moved through bank apps and remittance kiosks. Money landed on Fridays, rent covered, loans trimmed, a cousin's school fees paid before due date. Western Union lines shrank as online transfers normalized. Family WhatsApp groups became accounting dashboards. Diaspora networks built side channels, job tips, sublet lists, warnings about predatory colleges, turning first-wave mistakes into second-wave lessons. Agencies multiplied, good and bad, and the state pushed out advisories. Check licenses, read the fine print, don't wire to strangers. Meanwhile, something else hollowed. Town festivals rehearsed with stand-ins because the lead dancers were abroad. A basketball league in Bumthang merged teams to keep the season alive. A village shop cut hours because the owner's son, who handled inventory, now stocked shelves in Adelaide. The gaps weren't dramatic, they were cumulative, like missing teeth that change a smile. This was the moment everything complicated because the money softened the blow. Remittances became a second Hydropower, steady, personal, counter-cyclical. Landlords smiled, construction crews stayed busy, import bills felt lighter. At the same time, prices climbed where cash pooled. Rents rose near schools and hospitals as young professionals prepared to leave and wanted nicer flats just for 6 months. A teacher delayed a move because a landlord found a tenant who could pay in dollars, converted to ngultram at favorable rates. Impact bent planning across sectors. Colleges faced shrinking intakes and pitched new pathways, earn credits here, finish there, return with skills. Hospitals rebalanced training to widen the funnel. Businesses recruited from smaller towns and offered housing as bait. Government rolled out incentives, skill building for care work that meets foreign standards, entrepreneurship grants that match remittances if invested at home, digital visa experiments to export services without exporting people. Micro-stories keep the ledger human. A mother learns to send money back to her parents through an app her daughter set up before boarding. She practices the steps like a prayer. A headmaster gives diplomas to students who won't attend alumni day for years and tells them the assembly ground will remember their footsteps. A baker hires 2 cousins from a distant valley, teaches them the morning need, and puts a world clock above the oven set to Melbourne time. But there's one problem visas can't solve: belonging stretched thin. Kids abroad collect new rituals, weekend shifts, supermarket slang, a landlord's rules. Home collects their absence. Return becomes a question, not a date. The answer depends on whether opportunity at home feels like structure, not sentiment. It depends on whether remittances can seed businesses that last longer than a contract cycle, whether municipal offices meet diaspora expectations for speed and clarity, whether towns can grow without losing their core. What nobody knew at the time was how exits could become corridors both ways. The first wave sends money, the second sends managers, mentors, and markets. A nurse funds a clinic wing on a hill her father farmed. A coder opens a small studio that does night shift QA for a firm in Sydney. A town that thinned learns to count its people differently, by roots and roots, not just addresses. The exits aren't betrayal. They're a negotiation with time. The work now is keeping a path back that's wider than nostalgia and firmer than talk. Recalibrating the fortress, controlled openings, new risks. After the exits lit up, the state started rearranging the gates, not to throw them open, to hinge them better. The message architecture shifted from no to know why. The idea wasn't abandonment of the slow road, it was lane markings for a faster lane where it made sense. If the fortress was going to breathe, it needed windows that could be latched, unlatched, and watched. Policy tweaks moved first where pain was loudest. The sustainable development fee softened at the edges, long-stay discounts, regional pilots, targeted exemptions for events that pulled people deeper than the postcard loop. Not a U-turn, a dial. Tourism boards stopped selling a price point and started selling proof. trail maintenance schedules posted, ranger payrolls funded, homestay grants tied to waste systems that actually worked. Operators stitched itineraries across lesser-known valleys so money didn't pool in the West like runoff. The message under the brochure was simple: pay less per day if you stay longer and leave more behind than footprints. Meanwhile, other gates got new latches. Startups, long talked about, found their names on actual policy pages. Tax holidays for early years, startup Bhutan labels that meant faster paperwork, small grants that didn't require 3 recommendation letters from people you'd never met. A digital nomad visa took shape in plain language: come, work for clients abroad, spend here, respect the place. It wasn't about importing tech bros. It was about exporting services without exporting youth. Co-working spaces sprouted in Thimphu and Paro, one in a renovated school building where a whiteboard still held faint geometry proofs under a list of sprint tasks. Here's where it gets tricky. Opening to ideas means opening to systems and to cognitive friction. New rules need fast feedback loops or people default to old habits. A fintech sandbox invited experiments under regulators' supervision, payment apps that worked across borders, remittance tools that shaved fees without shaving compliance. That required new skills in offices that used to draft forestry bylaws, cyber risk, KYC standards, API audits. The same civil servants who checked dam contracts learned to read code and ask about latency. The curve was steep, the intent was clear. Education pivoted to meet the lane change. Universities added tracks that read like job boards: cloud support, UI/UX, digital marketing. Vocational centers upgraded to produce electricians who understood solar arrays, not just wiring houses. English remained the runway, Zonka stayed the ground. A class practiced pitching to a client in Singapore at noon and recited proverbs in the afternoon. It wasn't contradiction, it was calibration. But there was one problem no memo could dodge: bandwidth, literal and social. A startup can pitch across the world, but a shaky connection turns confidence into apology. A clever team can land a contract, but a teammate with a visa interview next week makes delivery risky. Policy pushed for remote work zones with reliable fiber. Reality lagged on a street where a backhoe cut a line with one careless scoop. Even when the internet held, instincts tugged. Office norms prized deference. Startups needed arguments. People learned to disagree politely on purpose. The border math adjusted too. If almost everything runs through India, make that convenience smarter. New cross-border payment rails cut remittance costs. Joint protocols for data centers took shape so servers humming in cool valleys didn't trip over compliance at customs. To the north, caution remained policy, but mapping talks continued in softer tones. Trade stayed southbound by design. Ideas moved in more directions, as long as they didn't carry a security bill. Micro-stories carried the texture of this recalibration. A startup founder pitched from Thimphu to a room in Singapore. The call smooth until a thunderstorm rolled across a ridge and ping turned to molasses. He filled the gap with a story about building offline-first features because his own town taught him to. A homestay owner in trashy Yangtze used an SDF-supported grant to add 2 rooms and a composting system, then posted her occupancy and revenue split monthly on a hand-painted board by the door so neighbors saw how value translated to cash. A regulator in sneakers sat with coders at a meetup and took notes on what their forms missed, then went back to an office and deleted 2 redundant fields the next morning. Meanwhile, something else matured: procurement with teeth. If the feed was the new town square, government learned to preempt. Drafts went online while they were still drafts. Comment windows stayed open long enough to matter. A Hydropower loan summary appeared with charts in plain English and Zonka. A post explained how an SDF rupee turned into a ranger's boots with suppliers named. It was housekeeping and theater, both necessary. Risk didn't vanish, it changed shape. More foreign students in, more foreign scams at the door. Fear headlines convert fast, reassurance needs receipts. A surge of co-working spaces, a handful of shell companies. A push for creative industries brought great films and one production that tried to stage a ritual in a way that felt wrong. The cultural board said no, and the internet argued for a week in 2 languages. The point wasn't to avoid stumbles, it was to stumble without falling off the ridge. Here's where it gets complicated. Controlled opening is a balancing act with no end. Too tight, and youth keep leaving. Too loose, and the center frays. Bhutan's advantage remains intimacy, ministries that answer calls, towns where a bad actor can't hide, a monarchy that can convene a room and reset tone without spectacle. Its risk is the same intimacy overused, favor traded as courtesy, critique swallowed as respect, change slowed by reflexive caution. So adjustments kept coming. A national service year got sharper edges, skills training embedded, community projects that solved specific problems, pathways into jobs that weren't platitudes. A diaspora desk opened in a ministry not to guilt returns, but to grease re-entries, credential recognition fast, business registration quicker, school placements for kids who speak English and Nepali better than Zonka, handled with care, not suspicion. A city plan in Jelefu sketched an economic hub that used monsoon and mountain as design, not obstacle, runways angled for wind, zones built for quiet industries that like clean power and clean consciences. The fortress never becomes a mall. It becomes a monastery with Wi-Fi, a place where silence is protected, access is invited, and everyone knows which rooms are for ceremony and which are for chatter. That contrast, sacred vs. accessible, is the story that makes people share. The risk is that people forget the difference. The fix is to keep reminding in law, in story, in who gets to speak and when. What nobody knew at the time was that recalibration would feel like contradiction until it didn't. Dress codes in morning meetings and hoodies at night. SDF receipts and discounted long stays. Ranger patrols and drone surveys. A Hydropower invoice next to a remittance chart on the same minister's desk. The country learned to hold two truths. Some things must open, some things must not. The art is deciding daily which is which. And under it all, the clock kept. Youth measured months, dams measured years, forests measured generations. The gates now swing on all three. What the wall can't hold. You can price, legislate, and bless the pace of change, but you can't slow time for the young or the river. If you want the hidden maps behind these choices, the trade routes, river grids, and border gates, watch the next deep dive on how geography writes laws. Subscribe for more true stories of places that bend policy with land and memory.